Above the mantel hung an oval frame containing 2 small photographs of Mamie and Ten McIntosh, Henry's parents. The picture of Ten showed him to be a stalwart, iron-muscled, bullet-headed, long-armed, sober Negro of whom his son was an exact replica, save for his smaller eyes and big laughing mouth. Mamie's face, more placid, more patient, smiled from its frame at the world, white and colored alike. She had cooked for the Deans from the time they married. Her boy had been born in their backyard 6 months before the Dean's son, and she had nursed them both, hardly knowing which was her own, as she used to say. Tracy looked at Mamie's picture hanging there above the mantel. He remembered her faint, clean body smell like a pile of fresh ironed sheets, and he remembered her rich, sweet smell on Sundays, when dressed in black silk she left the yard to go to church meeting. Even today, 20 years later, he remembered her deep, full breasts. There had been a time when her lap was wide enough for him and her Henry both to crawl up in. She'd sit there, knees spread wide, jogging them from side to side, singing vague sounds, breaking off, taking up after a little where she'd left off, sometimes reaching down to wipe one nose in the other. Knees jogging slowly, easing them back and forth, cradling them from time in its bitterness, glazing eyes with peace, tune moving on, and body moving with it, and all the world no wider, no deeper than the space her knees enclosed, no wider than that, and no colder than the heat from her breast. He remembered these things as you look at clouds moving across a quiet sky, circling, coming close together, moving apart again. They should have had meaning. They almost had meaning, and then no meaning. Henry was 8 then, and Tracy 7, the time when she whipped him. That he had completely forgotten. They were racing up and down the sidewalk. They'd chalked a line across it and were running. A little white girl on a bicycle was wheeling down the walk, arms up, face flying through space and cool air. "Move, move, move!" she shrieked. And Henry, feeling the rush of air, the sting of flying, shrieked back, "Move, move, move yourself!" and blocked the way, colliding with wheel and girl. She had fallen, scratching her leg. "How dare you?" she said low. All the flying, the whistling air gone. "How dare you do that?" "Ho!" Henry laughed. "Ho, ho, ho, ho!" he laughed, knowing nothing else to do. "Ho, ho, ho!" And Tracy laughed too, glad to see a girl fall, glad to see it happen, though he didn't know why. Mamie was sitting on the side steps, cooling off, resting a spell before starting her supper. Now she saw something she had to tend to. "You, Henry McIntosh, come here," she called, ease gone from her placid face. "Come here this minute." Henry came, and Tracy came with him, unused to the sound in Mamie's voice. "I gotta whip you," she said, and hushed. And the 2 children stood there in the backyard and waited, while Mamie went out to the garden and cut her a good, heavy sprout from the pecan tree. They stood there and watched her strong, wide back move through space that enclosed all they knew of living, moving now sharply, drawing new lines they had not seen before. They waited until she came back with the switch, took Henry by the shirt, bent him over her knee, and whipped him so hard that Tracy burst into sobs and covered his eyes from the sight, though he could not make himself leave the sound of it. Mamie whipped her boy. She whipped him, saying, "I got to learn it to you, you hear? I got to. You can't look at a white gal like that. You can't touch one. You can't speak to one except to say, 'Yes, ma'am,' and 'Thank you, ma'am.' Say after me. Say it." And Henry, squalling and catching his breath in strangling gasps, said it after her, word for word, 3 times, as she urged him on, tapping his legs with the tip of the switch. Then Blacklegs, whitened by the lash of his lesson, snuffling and dazed, he ran into the cabin in the backyard, and like a shamed dog crawled under the bed. Mamie's big brown hands took the switch and slowly broke it to pieces. Then she hurled them with sudden fury away from her. Hands fell to her side. She stood there staring across the roof of the big yellow house. Stared so long that the small white boy watching her thought she must not be able to find what she looked for. Slowly she sat down on the steps, wrapped her hands in her apron, lips pulled down with the weight of her thinking. Slowly she laid her face in her lap. "Mamie." Tracy had said the word with no idea behind it. "Mamie." She looked up, brown face wet with her crying, and twisted. "Go," she said. "Go to your own folks." And he turned and ran, cut to the bone by these new strange words. But though he had run, he had not been able to get away. The words followed him into the house, drove him through the big rooms, made him wander a lost thing, from side to side of a room, touching table, chair, wall, reaching down once to feel the floor, though he didn't know why he was feeling it, stretching until he ached all over to fill the empty dimensions of a life he had not chosen and did not know the size of, and into which our words told him he must go and stay forever. He stopped at his mother's room, opened the door, stood waiting. Alma was reading to his baby sister. Seemed she was always reading to her. "Come in, son," she said quietly, and smiled. He went to her, leaned on her chair, uncertain, anxious to do what would please her. "You reading?" "Yes." "Would you like to listen?" "Yes, ma'am," he said, and stared at the picture. Alma went on reading, answering Laura's questions, laughing with her, showing her the pictures. Their words and voices and movements began to shut out the emptiness, shut out the bigness he had felt lost in, and he leaned closer, hungry now to push through this wall of softness and warmth and get in there with them. "Don't lean so hard, son," Alma said. "You're so hot and sticky and smelly. When have you had a bath?" "This morning." "I don't see how you and Henry can get so dirty. You must take another at bedtime." She went on with her reading. Tracy moved away, went to his mother's dressing table, lifted a mirror, put it down, moved the brush, picked up the comb, put it in the brush, picked up a box of hairpins and dropped it, spilling the pins all over the place. "Oh, Tracy, now pick them up. If you don't want to listen, why not go out and play?" "He bad boy," said Laura, nodding her head in solemn disapproval. And Alma laughed softly and went on with the reading. Tracy picked up the pins, moved quickly to where his mother was sitting, jerked the book from her, threw it on the floor. "I hate books," he said. "I don't like her either," and gave Laura a hard push, then rushed from the room, out to the side porch, and stood there, breathing heavily, expecting his mother to follow and punish him, hoping she would follow and whip him as hard as Mamie had whipped Henry. But she didn't come. After a time he heard Mamie's heavy clump on the back steps. He heard the screen door open and close, heard her put down a load of wood in the box behind the stove, lift the stove lid, scratch a match, start a fire for supper. And unable longer to endure, he ran into the kitchen, stopped, suddenly could not go a step farther. Mamie turned. She held a piece of kindling in her hand, and her skirt had caught on the corner of the wood box. They stood there, a distance great between them, terrifying and strange and measureless, a floor that would not bear their weight to cross it. "Mamie," he whispered. There were other words, but he couldn't remember them. She laid down the wood, turned toward him, took a slow step, and now he was running. He buried his face against her, tried to keep the sound of his trouble in the apron. Through dress and petticoat he felt her leg and held on to it. They didn't try words. She ran her fingers through his hair, over his head. He clung to the old leg until she almost lost her balance with the weight of him against her. "Go get him and make him play." she said softly. Tracy was glad to be told something to do. He ran to the backyard cabin and into the room, crawled under the bed. "Come on," he said, "we're going to play." And Henry obeyed the voice and crawled out, swollen-faced and bleary-eyed and stiff-jointed. And they went back to the lane and gravely played. And slowly the blood moved as blood ought to move in young veins. And after a while they laughed and yelled at each other. And the evening was like any other evening by the time Mamie rang the bell for supper. When Ten came home from the mill, he saw Henry's swollen face, and he asked questions that had to be answered. Henry said his lesson, for he'd learned it well, and Ten listened, glum and tired, as 12 hours in the sawmill can make you tired. So it was easy when supper was over and they'd come back to the cabin, to let first quiet questions to Mamie turn quickly into all the words that hate and shame can form on a man's tongue. "So you beat your boy half to death, 'cause you thinks white folks like that?" "I learn him how to behave." "You beat your boy like he trash, to please white folks." "I learn him how to behave, Ten. He got to learn. You know that." Tracy and Henry, playing in the dark yard outside, drew near the words. "You beat the spirit out of him. He won't be a man fit for nothing." "Ten, our boy sassed a white girl." "What if he did? She sassed him first. He's a good boy. Good as any white gal in this goddamn town." "Ten, I wants my boy to live till he's grown. I wants him to live. He got to learn what he can't do. He got to learn there's white folks and colored folks and things you can't do if you wants to live. Jesus help me, I'm going to learn it to him. You're going to keep your hands off'n him, you hear? You touch him again, count of white folks, and I'll beat you till you can't get off'n the floor. He good as anybody, you hear? Good as anybody." "He ain't good as white folks. I got to learn him that. I got to do it, Ten. God, Jesus, I hate the sight of one." And Ten walked quickly to the mantel and picked up the blue and white glass vase that once had been in the dean's parlor and was now Mamie's one fine house ornament, and hurled it to the floor, smashing it into 100 pieces. "Lord, Lord," she cried and hushed as she stood looking at her husband. And Ten, satisfied a little, eased a little now, walked out on the shed and squatted there, staring into the dark yard. Mamie found the broom, slowly swept up the pieces, and put them in her apron, followed him to the shed. "It's easy to break things, Ten," she said, "mighty easy to break things. Ain't easy to mend 'em up again. Dat what I want my boy to learn early. Want him to learn early dat no matter what, white folks is always right, and you treat 'em always respectful." "It means I'm white," Tracy whispered, "and you're black." Eyes never leaving the shed, where the two stood talking, deep shadows against the lamp-lighted cabin. "It means, I reckon, that I'm always right." And he felt a strange new swelling pride rising in him. "How come?" asked Henry. "'Cause I'm white. You heard Mamie." "Do skin make the difference?" "Reckon so, yep." Tracy wasn't too sure of himself now. "Yep, reckon it do." Black boy and white boy stood there in the darkness, watching the grown folks' trouble. And slowly Henry turned and went to the cabin, and slowly Tracy went to the big yellow house.